checks on these things. Anyway, it's nice to be back and nice to see so many familiar faces. So my name is Dave Kiff, and I've been acting as the director for a short period of time of what is an association of Orange County cities, kind of like the League of Cities, but about 8 years ago, a lot of the cities in Orange County said some of the messages that the League is promoting and putting forward is not really an Orange County message. So they wanted to form another group that focused more on regional needs and kind of, as I say, kind of work within our own sandbox. So that's the Association of California Cities, Orange County. There's only one association named that way. The thought was maybe other counties might do something similar, but we're the only one to do it. So anyway, 27 cities are members, including Newport. And one of the things we work on is homelessness, so let me get right to that. And I'm going to speak just as background for you about why homelessness is a problem. There are a lot of reasons why. I think, most of this is kind of my personal understanding of this. A lot of it is just because we have more people and we have higher priced housing. And that's put a strain on the whole continuum of housing. So when we think of homelessness and solving someone's homelessness, you start with a shelter, getting that person into some kind of cover over their head for that night and then stabilize them. And then you move them towards to what's called transitional housing. And that's a place where someone could stay for anywhere up to 6 months or sometimes 12 months or 18 months to really stabilize them, get them in recovery if they need it, get them mental health treatment if they need that. A little bit of job training, just that stabilization. And then the next step is a more permanent place for that person. And it's probably someone with a problem that they can live on their own, but they need somebody to supervise them. And that's a concept called permanent supportive housing, where if it's me, I've got my own apartment, but somebody knocks on my door every day and says, "Hey Dave, how you doing? You know, did you go to your meeting today? Did you take your medications?" And that kind of wraps me with social services. So that's the concept of this. And then at that point, someone either could live there the rest of their lives or transition to something else that we would see as more of a traditional home environment that we might have. So that's the continuum, and there's compression at all ends of that right now. And there has been for a good handful of years. And what's going on countywide and regionally is Judge Dave Carter basically said the Santa Ana riverbed is a huge problem and we've got to move those people out of there. There was anywhere from 400 to 1,000 people just camping in the Santa Ana River. And you folks all saw that if you went up the 91 past by in Anaheim and by the Honda Center. And so they did that. The county and the cities there cleared those folks out. Well, where did they go? Some of them went to the Santa Ana Civic Center, which was then cleared out again, and some of them many went into shelters, but many went into our communities. And that certainly added to the concern that you would see in Corona del Mar and Newport Beach, that you do see more faces, more bodies, more people. And so part of that is that issue. The reason Judge Carter was able to do this, to say that people need to be taken out of the encampments and given some other safe place, is he's made an argument that cities should not be enforcing anti-camping laws unless we have beds to put people. So even though you've got an anti-camping law on the books, like Newport does, you need to be able to tell that person they have another place to go. If they reject that bed, then you can kick them out of where they are. So Judge Carter said, at least for the central Orange County cities, you're going to create a bunch of beds, and they did. There's shelter beds, a bunch new capacity of shelter beds in central Orange County. And we're going to clear the river, and we're going to put people with roofs over their heads. So all that happened, this was last spring. Today, fast forward to now, the most recent thing that happened, and this was something Will let me know right before I took this job. A judge in Boise, this is the Ninth Circuit, so all of our states in the western U.S. federal court, the judge in a Boise case, a three-judge panel actually, that's how it works, said basically what Judge Carter said is the law of the land in the Ninth Circuit. The Judge Carter had been kind of doing this a little bit on his own, and now the Ninth Circuit, in a completely unrelated case to what Judge Carter was doing, said yes, cities cannot enforce anti-camping laws without having beds to take people. So that's where we are today. And what the county has been working on is more beds. And they've tried to work with, by broken us down into regions. Newport Beach is in the central region with, we go up to Seal Beach and into Santa Ana and Garden Grove. Then South County is below us. And then they've tried to make the argument that every region needs to have a share of shelter beds. And then every city needs to have a share of permanent supportive housing. And for Newport, that number was about 76 units, but 2,700 countywide. And so again, think permanent supportive housing as an apartment and an apartment complex. It's very different from a shelter, and a shelter environment where people can come and go, and I think it just tends to be a neighborhood problem, obviously, with the shelter. And that's why those have been so hard to site. South Orange County has just had a nightmare trying to site their shelter. Obviously nobody wants it. Santa Ana and Anaheim have done better, and we're in the central region, which includes Santa Ana, so Santa Ana's beds count for Newport. So the judge is really looking to South Orange County, Irvine on the south, to try to conquer at least the shelter portion of that. And then I think with my organization, ACCOC, we've been trying to work on funding all this. So if you try to figure out what it would cost in a high expense area like Orange County to build upwards of 2,700 beds, we're talking $800 to $850 million. So those are not in cities' budgets. They're not in the county's budget. There are a couple things on the ballot in November that you should think about. Prop 1 sets forth $4 billion statewide just for housing and homelessness. $1 billion of the 4 goes to the Cal Vet program to specifically target veterans who are challenged with housing, and then the other $3 billion is apportioned some to housing trusts, which this organization helped create an Orange County Housing Finance Trust. And that would, again, focus on permanent supportive housing. So $3 billion, $1 billion in Prop 1. Prop 2, if you're not a person who likes bonds, Prop 2 actually says that the millionaire's tax that was passed a couple of years ago, Prop 63, those monies can be used for housing for mentally ill, and that money can be bonded. So Prop 2 is not new money, it's old money wrapped in an ability to be bonded for homeless housing for mentally ill. So those are 2 things that are on the ballot that are pretty important to housing. The housing trust that I'm working with hopes to get some of the Prop 1 money and some of the Prop 2 money if that passes. And then leverage that, because if you know affordable housing and housing for homelessness, you got to get 9 sources of funds to build something. You get federal tax credits. There's a federal tax credit program. You get some city funds. Newport has affordable housing set-aside funds that went to a great project over in Newport Shores. It's up and running, and I think the neighbors love it. It's a little 12-unit project. So anyway, you combine all those funds, maybe bond money, and then you can actually complete a project. So we're optimistic that this is a solution. Is it a solution today? No, it's a 4 or 5 year away solution. It takes a long time to get all that housing back into the pipeline. And where do you put it? Newport's pretty built out. And not everybody wants a permanent supportive housing facility, even if it's beautiful, because it's more intense. You certainly don't want that in the neighborhoods here. So to me, you start to look at things that are underperforming. Retail's changing. Sears is closing. Our malls look a lot different. Could we put more housing there? Could we look at, my office now, instead of at City Hall, is in Orange, and I drive past all of these kind of 1960s, 1970s office spaces that are 2-story and 1-story in Santa Ana and Orange, and the blocks and blocks are filled with them, and everything's for lease. So could you re-tenant something like that and use that? And that's what's going on. Permanent supportive housing groups like Danbury Housing are doing a wonderful veterans project, Veterans Village right there in Santa Ana, 72 units, looks terrific in the drawings. So all of that's happening, it's just going to take a while. So why don't I shut up there and invite your questions. And again, I'm not going to know as much as Keith will about what's going on in Newport right now, or Will or Scott. Nancy.
Fairview Park, is that completely off the books as far as some kind of transition or permanent housing?
You mean more the Fairview Development Center?
Yeah.
No, there's an aggressive push to try and use more of the beds there for both shelter and permanent supportive housing. So that's still very much in play.
And is it true, I've certainly heard that it's cheaper in the long run to get these people to get them housed than keep them on the street because of constant medical things and everything. Is that?
That's right. Hope would say that. Keith would say that in terms of just a simple. We don't have a place to put somebody in. Jail is not the right place. The hospital is not the right place. Those are the most expensive places to go. So it is a lot less expensive just to house somebody. Those other dollars are kind of fuzzy dollars, Hope dollars, cost of public safety dollars. And people have a hard time wrapping their arms around that. So I'm hopeful we'll move to that point, yes. Dennis?
Yeah, so you may not have any idea of this. I'm asking to foresee the future a little bit. So 4 or 5 years out, this takes place, we get some of that. But there's also underlying problems. So is the organization you're working with or anybody you know of dealing with those longer terms? So for example, we have a lot of mentally ill component of the homeless, and some would say that's because we're not providing facilities. So is there organizations that looking out 4 or 5 years after we deal with basically the crisis? Now how do we go upstream and reduce the input? Is there you got some ideas on that?
So a couple things are going on. One, that millionaire's tax, that Prop 63, was solely dedicated towards treatment for folks who are mentally ill, substance abuse, mental illness, all combined into one. So there is money there. The county has quite a bit of money there. It's because it goes to the counties. It's not literal. I guess it's kind of sitting in the bank, but they have a plan to start to spend it, including on things like crisis stabilization units. And Costa Mesa, our neighbor, has stepped up and said, we will host a crisis stabilization unit. And what is that? That's when somebody's calling, or somebody's standing in front of a restaurant, yelling, screaming, swearing. Here in Newport, that used to happen. And call the police. Okay, where are the police taking? Well, they can't really go to the jail. So this would be a place 24/7 where that person could be 5150 and hopefully get the mental health care that they need. So when you combine that immediate, urgent addressing of the problem with, again, permanent supportive housing, where if I have a mental illness, I can live on my own as long as somebody checks up on me. I think that's the long-term solution. How do we get to drug abuse and addiction? It's a second question, but it's getting there.
Okay. Right.
Just a comment is that that permanent supportive housing is the shelter in Anaheim. That's not permanent supportive, is it?
That's correct. The Bridges at Kramer is a kind of a second step in from a shelter. It's a controlled environment, but it's a shelter.
Well, I wanted to point that one out because my office is probably within a mile, probably more like a half mile from that facility, which I did not know existed until they shut down the riverbed. So then they kept talking about it. I'm like, where is this? It's somewhere close to where I work. And I did find it, and I finally realized why that bus stop was very busy right there. But I'm bringing that out as a comment because there you have the 91 freeway on one side. You've got a bunch of commercial, maybe light manufacturing. The houses are on the other side of 91, kind of on the other side of 57. So you've got this whole area where it really truly was quiet for a long time. It may make some sense to look for that kind of land use. Of course, now you need the availability of the, whatever the buildings are, but that seems to have worked fairly well without creating a whole lot of chaos. I say that literally yesterday, a guy came to our door asking for money and food for his baby. He needed money for food for his baby, and so somebody at the office went and got him a bag of groceries, and I said, he's not going to take it. And he did not take it. So there you go. But anyway, just a suggestion on land uses that would work.
Well, I think you're right. Those are the spots. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
You quoted 2,700 beds. Where does that number come from? And what is the overall guess of the homelessness?
So two good questions. One thing that we do to try to establish the number of homelessness is we call it a point-in-time count. And it's every 2 years. So the next one's coming up in January. And you get up at 4 in the morning, it's cold Sunday or Saturday in January, and you go you try to cover the whole county. So thousands of volunteers help do this. And the count we came up with last time was about 4,500. That seems low. Obviously, you're not going to be able to find everybody in every bush and every culvert. And so that was, again, January 2017. So that 2,700 unit number comes in part from that. Obviously, you don't need a home for everyone. A single unit for everyone, because some of them are families. But that's basically what that comes from.
This is going to sound weird, but this reminds me a bit of the trash and runoff problem. And that we're dealing with an issue, but is anybody dealing with, some of these people are there not because they have mental illnesses or drug events, that they've just been priced out of housing, and they've had this crisis, and suddenly they're in the cars or whatever. Are there any programs trying to identify this early and saying, hey, we can get you this, take care of you for a couple of months or something while you get over this thing?
There are programs like that. They're good ones run, an organization called 211OC tries to know and learn about everyone who is at risk of homelessness, who is in trouble, who just needs a little bit of help to get them through another month or two to keep them in their place. So they do have funds for that. Never enough, but if you ever know of someone like that, 211OC is a great source to go to. 211OC. Yeah.
Question.
Sure.
I've heard the statistic that 28% of the people that are on the streets, that we feed at food lines on Sundays or whatever, really will never go into a shelter or any kind of program. And largely we see a lot of the same faces. And so, what do we have a solution for that? What do we do for those folks?
So I have heard that statistic too, and if Tony Yim were here, he would say that everyone can be talked into housing. I'm still a little skeptical, but that's what he said. So Tony would say you got to establish trust, you got to identify the things that they're eligible for that they've probably fallen through the cracks on, and then eventually get them into housing. I think you're right. There's a component of the population that will never go into housing, and that's why it's important to kind of get our city rights back about anti-camping, which means we have to create beds. But so we could go to that person and say, look, you may not want a bed. There's a bed right here for you. If you don't want it, I'm going to have to ask you to leave, and you're going to leave. Otherwise, I will throw you in jail. And you can't address it that way. Can you address it from that person's human needs? That's a little bit harder if they really don't want it. But I think more people than you would think would be willing to go into housing was the right type of housing. Laura and then.
So, okay, so to that point, John Morlock writes great podcasts and stories about the Fairview, about project issues. And one is the Fairview Developmental Center. And I mean, can you talk more about the political context? I mean, what he said is there were 2,000 beds there at one point, and if you were to put the developmental center into play, you would have a lot of infrastructure around it. You could have a range of supportive services and a ladder of services. And so from my perspective, it makes a lot of sense regionally to really push for that. But, what do you think?
Yeah.
And who do we need to talk to say, hey, look, grow a pair and let's get something going?
The folks in Costa Mesa, the city council and the citizens there say, wait, why are we dealing with all this problem? Why just us?
They're already there. Yeah.
And that's true. But Fairview's gotten smaller over time. So long way to answer your question, there are still people who are developmentally disabled who are housed there. So it's still operating as its intended purpose. But you could, and a whole group is advocating for this, including Mr. Morlock, Senator Morlock, you could carve out a good portion of that and have exactly what you're saying, the right housing, the right services at a really good location. And I would agree with you 100% that it's a good location. The question for all of us outside of Costa Mesa is, how do you assure Costa Mesa that everyone else isn't going to just say, okay, problem solved, you got it. And that's why I would fall back, and I have this talk with Will and Scott and the council, is we need to do something. Every community needs to do something. Could we be the place that maybe employs people or provides training for people? We may not, we're too expensive to house people, but could we help somewhere else? So the folks at Costa Mesa say, there goes Newport again, just washing their hands of it all, or paying money to make it go away. So anyway, that is a great site. Sure.
A little bit more information, if I may, on 2110C. It is a 501c3. It's based in Santa Ana. It's a bank of about, currently about 12 to 15. It's almost like a telemarketing activity. The calls to 2110C are free calls. Anyone can call from any phone number. And what they do is they interview as much as they possibly can on the telephone when people call in. They say, what's your needs? What's your situation? Let me see if I can direct you to someplace. Unfortunately, it's usually more of a handoff than it is a direct assistance, but they will address a whole multitude of resources. And next meeting, I will bring in, they have business cards that are just say 2110C. They have a list of all of the various services or the key services that they offer. And one of the things that I do, if I see someone who is what I perceive to be a true homeless person or a person in need, as opposed to just a panhandler, and even with a panhandler, I may give them a few dollars, but I'll also give them a card that says 2110C. I tell them about it. You can call. It's free. So if you really have a need, give them a call, and they'll see if they can help you. And it's surprising, I would say, every time that I've given out a card, the people I've given the cards to say, never heard of it, don't know anything about it. So it's a good service. And a pitch for 2110C, I've been a supporter for a number of years, as are most charitable organizations. They're always in the need of funds. They would love to be able to expand their services. It's 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365. So if you would like to make any donations to them, I know they would be grateful for those. So.
Well, there's some real life issues that are coming up with this stuff, and I mean, we've got typhus in LA, in Skid Row. I mean, that to me is like really unacceptable. So, I mean, there's so many sides to this stuff. I mean, hepatitis in San Diego. You know, some of us that don't want to see that side of it either, but the overall solution, I must admit, is a little overwhelming.
It's very long.
Does anybody have any other questions for Dave?
I do.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just wondering if there were any special attention of being given to the kids, the homeless kids in the county.
Yeah, the short answer is a good answer, especially with kids and families. We're pretty close to being able to house all of the family need that we have. There's a great group in Irvine called Families Forward. That's all they do is focus on housing single moms with kids, single dads with kids, anybody where the kids are in the environment. But it does help to move that whole housing continuum that we talked about, to be able to create more entry-level housing for families, especially single moms who need that.
So I guess the way we can help is to assist our council in knowing that we've got to do something, whatever that something part would be. And it may be a little more creative in Newport as opposed to.
I mean, it's what works best for Newport, but kind of know that everybody needs to have a little, row, a little oar in the water. Otherwise it won't work region-wide, because the judge won't allow it, and the cities that are bearing the burden of it will revolt. What was that? I don't know, but yeah, I think if everybody participates in some way, we get to a good solution.
There's no more questions, Dave. Thank you. It's great to
You're
have
very
you
welcome.
back.
Good to see everybody. Thanks.